Okay, this is a Shir on Likutei Sichos, volume 21, the portion of Vaerah, the first Sicha in the book. This is a Sicha that's going to give us a look at how to read the opening verses of the portion of Vaerah, and it's going to give us a look about the, I won't say tug of war, about the relationship between Pshat, the simple reading of the verse, and sometimes the inevitable integration of Medrash to be able to get the background and to be able to make contextual sense of the topic. So we'll see that the Medrash and the Pshat here require each other to give us a full comprehension of what takes place in the dialogue between Hashem, between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem. And this is unique, this Sikha is unique because Rashi is really giving us, the way the Rebbe shows us what Rashi is teaching us, is Rashi will be teaching us how sometimes you cannot just rely on the literal, simple translation of the words, even from the prism of Rashi, which is usually he reads the simple translation. Sometimes you need to understand the context which the Medrash gives, and they must be read together. And this is one of those unique places. So let's jump in. It's an enigmatic topic in general because it's Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Hashem last week and he complains. Something that has never happened before in the history, in the 2,500 years of the history of the world, nobody has ever come to Hashem in the way that Moshe Rabbeinu challenged Hashem. And against this background, we start the Sikha, paragraph 1. On the verses in the beginning of our parsha that says, Vaerah el Avram, and I appeared to Avram, etc. And I have also established my covenant with them. Rashi brings two interpretations. In other words, the very parsha opens with a pasuk that doesn't seem to have an easy explanation. The pasuk starts, Hashem spoke to Moshe, I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So what is the pasuk? What is the pasuk introducing? What is the meaning of those words? It's not just a historical fact. We all know that Hashem appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Read the book of Bereshis, you'll see it. Hashem is telling Avram's Moshe Rabbeinu something in response to something. So one way of learning these verses that the content of this verse is a preparation for what Hashem is about to say. Hashem's going to say, look, I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. I promised them I'm going to take their children to the land. Now I have heard the cries of the Jewish people, the groans of the Jewish people, and that's why I tell the Bnei Yisrael now, I'm going to take you out of Egypt. And he uses 4 descriptive verses, plus he says, I'll bring you to the land of Israel. In other words, in introduction to Hashem saying, I'm going to take the Jewish people out, he first says, I'm doing it because I promised the forefathers. I made a covenant, I made a pact. I haven't yet fulfilled it, so now Moshe Rabbeinu should know that promise that I made to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and now has come the time I'm going to fulfill it. That's the simple reading of the verse. Second option in reading this opening words of the parsha is base. Raboteinu darshuhu li'inyan shel mala. Our rabbis expounded that this opening verse of the parsha is referring back to something we just read in the last parsha. When Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lama hareota, why have you done bad to this people? Remember, Hashem tells Moshe, go tell the Paro, let my people go. He goes to say it. Paro says, you guys are lazy. You have time during the day to dream about being free. I'm not going to give you straw. You've produced the same quota without us providing straw. So they complained. It became even worse. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, why have you done bad? Why did you send me? Nothing happened. Nothing good happened. Now, this parsha comes and says, by the way, Moshe Rabbeinu, you said, why have you done bad? I want to tell you that I'm not used to having this experience. The people I used to speak to, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, when I told them things, even if I didn't fulfill them, they never spoke back. Why are you speaking back? And so Hashem spoke harshly to Moshe here. So in other words, again, I I just want to make clear the two ways of learning this narrative. Our parsha starts, Vayidaber Elokim and Moshe. Hashem spoke to Moshe and said, I am Hashem. And I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I promised them to take them out of Egypt. And I didn't do it yet, but now I heard the groans of the people of Israel. I'm going to take them out of Egypt. It's a self-standing parsha. You don't have to go back and say it refers to anything that was said earlier. Comes Rashi and says, our rabbis taught that actually the first verse of the parsha goes back, or actually the parsha in general, the beginning, this parsha goes back unto Moshe Rabbeinu's question to Hashem, his challenge to Hashem, why have you done bad to the people? And Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem comes back to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, excuse me, I'm not used to this kind of behavior. The forefathers, I miss them. They didn't speak back to me. They didn't need to understand everything. And Hashem was speaking a little bit harshly. So, Rashi then continues, and he says that I just brought a medrash that this is a continuation, a response to Moshe Rabbeinu's question, why have you done bad? But the truth is the medrash doesn't really fit in the literal context of the pasuk for several reasons. And he brings two questions about why it doesn't fit. Just the flow doesn't fit. And then he continues, says, but that's why I say, let's read the verse based on what the pshat of the text is, as I've explained. But the expounding, the drasha will also stand. How can they both be coexistent? The simple meaning and a drasha, a medrash that's different than the simple meaning? Well, it says already in the verse that Halo ko dvarai kaesh. Based in Yirmiyah, it says, my words, says Hashem, are like fire. Ukepatish, so my words are like fire, and also kepatish yefotzet sela, like a hammer that breaks a rock. Mitchalek lekama nitzotzot, says Rashi, and it divides into several sparks. We need to understand, and we're going to analyze, what does it mean that the hammer bangs the rock? But the way we understand it now, the hammer splinters the rock goes in all directions. Similarly, Hashem's word is able to be splintered off into many directions. There's not just one interpretation. It can at the same time contain various different levels of interpretation. Says Rashi, in this pasuk, learn the pshat, but also learn the medrash. So really, it seems that Rashi is trying to tell us, first of all, that according to pshat, if you want to learn the simple reading of the pasuk, the literal reading of the pasuk, the medrash doesn't fit in, just doesn't fit into the words properly. And usually Rashi says, I come to explain pshat, explain the simple meaning, and only I bring agada, I bring medrash only when I need to, when the agada, when the medrash fits well into the words, into the topic. So here, the medrash really doesn't fit. On the other hand, Rashi is saying that don't say the medrash doesn't have any relevance here, because, look, even if the medrash is not literal, v'hadrashat tidaresh, says Rashi, the drasha should be expounded, because the Torah itself can be divided into so many ways, just like a rock splinters into many different pieces. So, on the contrary, there's a way of pshat, but there's also a way of drash, there's also a way of medrash. That should not be taken away. We need both of them, says Rashi. But that seems a bit odd, paragraph 2. Why? Because, first of all, Rashi does not usually bring down an interpretation and then say, but it doesn't really fit. Rashi is not a book of bringing options and having a pilpul. Rashi just wants you to understand the Chumash. He says, he brings the interpretation that fits. Here, Rashi brings a Rabotenu Darshu, he brings a Medrash, and then he says, but it doesn't really fit. But it doesn't really fit, don't bring it. The other hand, if Rashi wants to tell us that even when a Medrash doesn't fit pshat, literally, it still has a place in the truth of understanding the Torah, because the Torah can be splintered into many. It's like a rock that has many different splinters. They're all part of the rock. Just because one splinter went here, one splinter went there, where's the rock? The rock is in all of them. So if that's what Rashi is trying to tell us, why doesn't he say it the first time he brings a medrash? That's not here. You know how many parshas we are into the Torah? We did the whole book of Bereshis. We're in the second book of the book of Shemot. We've brought medrash in the first parsha of the Torah. There was medrash already. We're going to get there. This is actually the topic. How to reconcile that there are conflicting interpretations and how they can both be relevant in the same pasuk and be brought by Rashi. You see, important to note, the fact that other mefarshim, other commentaries bring conflicting interpretations, that's not a problem. They didn't set out to just be the translation of the Torah. Rashi set out to be the guide for the 5-year-old. He only brings alternative interpretations when you need them to understand the pasuk. Here he does something unusual. He brings a medrash that says doesn't fit the simple meaning, but a medrash still stands. If you're trying to validate that there's room for medrash, okay, say it the first time you bring a medrash. But we're well into the Torah, and now we understand that medrash has a place. Well, why is it relevant here? What's special about this medrash in this particular topic that he makes this point? Especially in the book of Bereshis, Rashi says there are many medrashim. And he says, you can look in the Medrash Bereshis Rabbah, you can look in various places. And he says, but I have come to explain Pshat. Right? He's already told us that. We know that that Rashi obviously believes in Medrash and says there are Medrashim. But here, it seems to be, and if that's the case, why doesn't Rashi give his analogy of the splitting of the rock? In the first time, he brings a Medrash to say that, yes, the Torah can be understood in many different ways, like a rock can splinter into many different fragments of the stone. Paragraph 3. Simply speaking, we learn that why does Rashi bring the Medrash? The Rabboteinu, what our rabbis expound. Because this will answer several questions in the actual verse. And that is as follows. Again, try and picture the makeup of the parsha. The parsha starts, Hashem spoke to Moshe. Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe, Hashem spoke to Moshe. Vayomer elav ani Hashem, and he said, I am Hashem. Rashi says, Vaydaber Elokim. Elokim is Hashem as judge. Hashem is judging Moshe here. Usually when Hashem speaks to Moshe later on in the Torah, how does he say it? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei is a merciful name. It's a soft name. Hashem speaks lovingly to Moshe. Here he doesn't speak lovingly. The verse opens up with Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe. Hashem speaks judgmentally to Moshe. And Rashi says he spoke to him judgmentally because Moshe spoke to him just before, a little bit harshly. He says, Hashem, why did you do bad? Now, Rashi doesn't say that that's a medrash. Rashi learns that as being simple interpretation of Pshat. We have to understand why the word Elokim is used. The Torah is telling us Hashem spoke harshly to Moshe. But then Hashem says that then Rashi says that the continuation, and I appear to the forefathers, is the beginning of a new topic. Not just, and I spoke to the forefathers, but the second part of the first verse. Remember, this verse starts by Daber Elokim el Moshe. Elokim spoke to Moshe, judgmental. Et nachta, pause, halfway through the pasuk. The pasuk continues. Vayomer elav ani Hashem. He said, I'm Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, merciful. I fulfill my promises. And I've promised the forefathers. And that's why I'm going to listen to the Jews. You see that in the middle of the pasuk, first part of the pasuk goes back on rebuking being harsh to Moshe. The middle of the pasuk, all of a sudden starts a new topic. Hashem speaks gently and he says, I did promise and I need to fulfill my promise, and I've heard their groans. It's a big problem. It's a big problem in Pshat to have a pasuk just dividing like that. First half of pasuk going back on speaking harshly on the before, and the second half pasuk starting a new topic. It's a bit of a problem. Also, right after Moshe says, why have you done lama hareota? Why have you done bad? Hashem does give an answer. He says, you will see now what I will do. I'll take the Jews out of Egypt. In that you will see now, there's an inference. You're going to see what's going to happen now in Exodus. but you're not going to see what will happen later in going into the land of Canaan, the big victories of settling the land. Moshe Rabbeinu was already told, you spoke to me, so to speak, judgmentally, Hashem says, I'm going to judge you back. You're not going to go into the land of Canaan. It was already told here that he's not going to make it into the land of Israel. So if that's the case, he was already reprimanded. So why Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe? This harsh talk, why isn't it part of last week's parsha? Why is it the beginning of this week's parsha? And then in the middle of the pasuk, Hashem moves over to speaking, according to the Pshat, Hashem moves over to speaking in the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, in the merciful name, and he says, yes, I did promise and I have to fulfill. That's why Rashi says, look, we got it. We need to also take into account there's another way of understanding this, because the literal Pshat way of understanding has some fundamental questions that we cannot walk away from. So that's why Rashi says that there's also Rabbi Seinu, there's also the teaching of our sages, the Medrash. According to that, it makes perfect sense. In the Medrash, we learn the Midrashic, by Daber Elokim and Moshe, Hashem spoke harshly to Moshe, and he told him, look, I am Hashem who always fulfills what I said. I came to the forefathers, and they never questioned me. This is all part of the judgmentalism. It doesn't stop. It's a flow. It's a much more perfect flow. It's the same, it's the mishpat. When Hashem speaks judgmentally to Moshe, he follows through in the next few psukim as well. The flow works much better. There are other issues which tell us it's not pshat, but on the other hand, the simple literal translation also has a critical issue, which means we need to look for some alternate way of giving meaning to why it was moved into this parsha. Paragraph 4. However, when you really look closely, you can't really answer this, because Rashi, it would be nice if Rashi would say that there's such a big question, we need the Medrash. So you guys, we need joint effort here. I can explain it literally, but I need the Medrash as well. Let's do a joint effort here. Let's make a partnership. But Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says, the Medrash doesn't fit the pasuk for several reasons. In other words, the interpretation are the problems, the issues with the interpretation are so big that one second. Rashi says, yeah, the Medrash cannot. There's serious questions also in the Medrash's interpretation to reconcile it with Pshat. It doesn't fit the simple translation of the pasuk. So if that's the case, the question comes back. If you're telling us that the Medrash doesn't fit the literal translation, so why bring the Medrash? Rashi, you have set out your task to be a literal translator, not a Midrashic bringer. Because even in the place where Rashi does recognize that there's a Medrash and even refers to a Medrash, it's always answering a question that arises in the simple reading of the pasuk. And Rashi will say, there's Medrash. Many places Rashi says, there's another way of looking at the Medrash. He doesn't quote the Medrash. Here he quotes it and says, but it doesn't work literally. It doesn't work literally. Don't tell us the details of it. So there's something going on here, which is different than the average relationship between the simple meaning and the Medrash. In this particular case, there's something deeper or something different than usual. Hey, so paragraph 5. In the continuation of Rashi, it says, "V'hadrasha tidaresh," that the drasha will be expounded, as it says, are my words not like fire, says Hashem, and like a hammer shatters a stone, and it goes to various sparks. We have to understand, what is this sparks coming out of a stone? Sparks don't usually come out of a stone. When it says splitting into several sparks, the Mefarshim, the commentaries try to understand, what does it mean? What's being divided? What's dividing into sparks? One interpretation is that it's speaking about the stone shattering into various, we wouldn't call them sparks. we would call them fragments of stone, pieces of stone. Like a hammer shatters a stone. In other words, the stone breaks down. And similarly, there's many interpretations. It's like the verse is broken down into various interpretations. They're all part of the verse, just like the fragments are part of the stone. Another interpretation of this analogy is that it means that the hammer gets broken down. The sela, the stone, is so powerful that the iron hammer gets broken down. That's another way of learning it. And a third way of learning this analogy is that it's going to the hammer, but it means that the hammer itself doesn't mean the hammer gets broken into fragments, but through banging the hammer on the stone, what comes out of the hammer hitting the stone are sparks of fire. So the sparks are literally like the flint, like from the friction, sparks go shooting in all directions. In each of the ways of learning, there's a difficulty. Either way you learn, there's a difficulty in understanding the analogy. Why? In the first way, that when we talk about the rock fragmenting, it's not understood. Since the rock fragments into many pieces, why is Rashi calling it sparks? Sparks are things that are shiny. Sparks are not fragments of stone. That the word nitzotzot in Hebrew doesn't really fit that. In the second interpretation, that the hammer is breaking down into fragments, also not understood. First of all, it's against the simple understanding to say that the hammer gets broken down by the stone. That's first of all. Second of all, Rashi should have brought that. Here we're talking, Rashi would have had to specify, we're talking about a very hard rock that can't even be broken by iron, right? And that's why it breaks the iron hammer. Not like a regular stone, which usually in a regular stone, the hammer will break the stone. In the third interpretation, so the first two ways of understanding that either the stone is fragmented or the hammer breaks down, both of these are difficult to understand. Even in the third interpretation, when we speak about the sparks going from the stone, the hammer hitting the stone, so it says it divides, it divides into several sparks. It means that something is dividing. When sparks go out from a metal hitting a rock, that's sparks that are not coming out of the rock. It's not that the rock is being divided, right? So, and here we have an even bigger question. Rashi is supposed to be writing for a 5-year-old. He writes things clearly. It should be understood to a 5-year-old. Why does Rashi write this in such an enigmatic way? We have 3 ways of understanding it. Each of them doesn't really fit so well. And a bigger question is that when Rashi gives a similar explanation in his interpretation on the Talmud, he says that the stone fragments. If he says there that it means clearly the stone is fragmenting, why doesn't he say that clearly in his interpretation to the Torah, where he's speaking to a Talmud, you're supposed to be 15-year-old. In the Chumash, you're supposed to be 5-year-old. If in the Talmud, where he explains what it means, Talmudically, Rashi explained that the stone fragments, and he says it clearly without leaving any room for doubt. Why doesn't he say it clearly to the 5-year-old here? So it must mean he doesn't mean it. Otherwise, he would say it. And there's another thing we understand, paragraph 6, another thing we have to look at in Rashi. When Rashi brings this verse, like a hammer breaking down a rock, or a hammer being broken by a rock, or a hammer sparking a rock, however we'll understand it, he also brings the first part of the verse. My words, halok kod dvarai ka'esh. My words are like fire. Why is that relevant? Why is it relevant to speak about the words of Hashem being like fire? Really, what's the analogy supposed to tell us? The analogy is supposed to tell us you can have several interpretations on the same verse, and they're all right. They're all valid. The analogy is you can break a rock into many pieces, and they're all the rock. Even though there's one this side, one that side, they flew in different directions. It's all the rock. You can break down the Torah into different interpretations. It's all Torah. Why do I have to bring the first part of the verse that says the Torah is like fire? What's that got to do with understanding that the Torah can be given in many different interpretations? We've asked a lot of questions. I hope we're going to have some good answers, right? A bigger question, even this concept that we learned, just like a hammer splatters a rock, right, into many sparks. Similarly, the Torah gets divided into many different portions. We have it in two other places in the Talmud. Talmud in Tractate of Shabbos, the Talmud in the Book of Sanhedrin, and in the Masechta Shabbos, we learn. What does this teach us? The Tractate of Shabbos, the Gemara says this teaches us that every word of Hashem, every utterance of Hashem can be divided into 70 languages. And in Masechta Sanhedrin, the Tractate of Sanhedrin tells us every word of Hashem, every verse of Hashem can be learned, one can learn, one can see it, one can see many reasons for the same verse. There can be many reasons coming to explain that same mitzvah, that same halacha, that same verse. In both of those places where it tells us about the fragmentation, about the fact that the Torah is divided into so many ways, it does not bring the opening word of that pasuk, which Rashi brings here, which is halot kod dvarai ka'esh, that my words are like fire. You don't need the fire to explain, to learn this, to learn what we're really trying to teach, that it's like a rock that can be broken down into many different fragments, which is why just as the Torah can be broken down into many different reasonings, many different levels of understanding. Interesting. There's so that's the question. We have to understand, what is Rashi, what does he mean by the fragmentation? What's being fragmented? And why does he bring the pasuk, the beginning of the pasuk, that the words of Hashem are like fire? Here we have now something parenthetical. The Gemara Sukkah brings us another example, some other concept of hammer breaking stone as follows. The Gemara says, Masechta Kiddushin, Masechta Sukkah, that if the Yetzer Harim, if that disgusting guy starts up with you, which disgusting guy? The disgusting guy that's in every one of us, the Yetzer Hara. If that menuvel, he's called a menuvel, despicable guy. If that menuvel, that despicable person in you, that Yetzer Hara, comes and wants to start up with you, pull him to the Beit Medrash, pull him to the house of study Torah. Because you know what happens in the house of study Torah? He's going to lose his battle. He's going to do anything to you. Why? ... But the Gemara finishes, even if your despicable guy inside of you is as strong as iron, he's going to mitpotzetz. He's going to literally going to explode. Mitpotzetz, he's going to become fragmented. Why? Because it says in the Torah, my words, Hashem says, words of Torah are like fire. And just like a hammer splatters a stone, splinters a stone, that's the way Hashem's words are. So if you take the strong guy in you, that strong Yetzer Hara, you take him to the Beit Medrash, take him to the house of study, Torah is so powerful, it's going to splinter him, it's going to knock him out. So there we understand why the pasuk brings. So you see there the pasuk brings, the Talmud brings the beginning of the pasuk. My words are like fire, but we understand why he brings there my words are like fire. You know why? Because we're talking about taking the Yetzer Hara to the house of study, and we're saying if he's strong as iron, he's going to explode. How is that? Because we know that fire has a very strong effect on metal. And so we want to tell you, even if it's like metal, bring him to the Torah. The Torah is going to be like this. The words of Hashem are like a powerful fire. It's going to expand. It's going to affect the metal. It's going to overpower the metal. But here in our interpretation, when we're seemingly just trying to say that just like a stone splinters, similarly, the Torah can be learned in many different interpretations, why bring the first part of that pasuk about the fieriness of Torah? Paragraph 7. So many questions. These questions we asked become even bigger when we take a look at the portion of Vayishlach, where Rashi similarly has what seems to be a conflict between Pshat and Medrash. And the pasuk where it says that Hashem, Vayikra lo, that Yaakov built him Mizbeach. Vayikra lo, and he called it Kel Elokei Yisrael, the God, Kel Elokei Yisrael, of the God of Jacob, of Yisrael. Rashi says there's two interpretations. One is literal, Pshat, and one is expounded by the Medrash, Rabbeinu Darshan. The two interpretations there is that that either Yaakov built him Mizbeach and he called it with a name that would remind him about the miracles that Hashem does, that Hashem is the God of Israel and he saved him. Or the Medrash is that by Yikra lo, that he called him Vayikra lo Vayikra lo Kel Elokei Yisrael. If I remember correctly, that Hashem, Elokei Yisrael, Hashem, the God of Israel, called Yaakov Kel, gave him the name Kel, also God. But I don't remember what fully the Medrash said. Sorry, but anyway, there's this. So there's this struggle, so to speak. There's a Medrash and there's literal. And the Rashi finishes there with a similar analogy, like we're saying here, but this is back in Vayishlach. He says, "V'divrei Torah kepatitche fotzetzela." The words of Torah are like a hammer that splinters a rock. Mitchalkim lekama ta'amim, gets divided into several reasons. But Ani, says Rashi, even though the Torah can be divided into many different interpretations, Ani liyashev pshuto shel mikra. I have come to make things work in the simple interpretation of the Torah. I give literal interpretation. So Rashi said very clearly, first of all, yes, it divides into many different ways, and that's going on the Torah. And the analogy is that the hammer splinters the stone, which means that the stone is the Torah and the hammer splits the Torah. In other words, the Torah can go many different directions. But Rashi also says, but Rashi doesn't bring that the Torah is like fire. You see, so he brought that analogy earlier, and again he didn't bring the fire part. So why, when in our parsha, first of all, why does he say mitchalek lekama nitzotzot? Why doesn't he say, as he said in the book of Bereshit, that the stone gets splintered into different parts? And also, why does he bring the pasuk about the Torah being like fire? So now we're going to answer paragraph 8. Now we're going to try and pull it all together. A lot of questions, but the answer will pull everything together. First of all, one change is going to answer the other. These changes that Rashi brings from the way he interprets in the portion of Vayishlach, where he has a struggle between Pshat and Medrash, and the fact that he adds Halokot Varai Ka'esh, that the words of Torah are like fire, and the fact that he writes that it gets divided into sparks and not into particles of stone, Rashi is telling us very clearly. In other words, Rashi is being very clear that the sparks, that the division that takes place is going on the fire. In other words, if he speaks about fire and then he uses the word nitzotzot, he obviously means the fire and sparks are two terminologies that fit. Pieces of stone are not nitzotzot. So the other places where he doesn't speak about fire, he speaks about the stone fragmenting. Here where he says, my words are like fire, says Hashem, he speaks about nitzotzot. Obviously, those nitzotzot, the sparks, are going back to the analogy of fire. So one second, how is this working? What it means here is, just like simple, just read Rashi simply. Rashi says like this, Hashem says, aren't my words like fire? And my words, and the Torah is like a hammer, which can break a rock. And just like a hammer breaks a rock, the analogy of a hammer breaking a rock, now look at fire, the Torah being fire, the fire also becomes divided into many sparks. It's not that the rock is becoming sparks. It's my words are like fire, and my words are like, and just like a hammer breaks a rock into many fragments, the fire of Torah can also be broken into many subsets of fire, into many sparks. Oh, the reason why Rashi changes his language from the portion of Vayishlach, where he talks about the Torah being like a rock splintered into many different ways, many interpretations, he speaks here about that the Torah is like fire, and the fire is divided into sparks coming out of a fire. Each spark is like another interpretation, is because here the best way to explain the relationship between the pshat and the medrash here is like sparks of fire. What does that mean? As we're going to now spell out. Paragraph 9. the meaning of what Rashi is saying. When Rashi says, look, I have an issue. I have an issue that the Medrash doesn't fit the literal words. That's why I say let the pasuk be understood simply, but let the drasha also stand alongside it. It's not the way it sounds just in a quick reading that Rashi is trying to tell us the Medrash is not untrue. It doesn't fit the words, but let it be there. It's also true. No, that's not what we're saying. Obviously, Medrash is true. We've been bringing Medrash all the parshas till now. Rashi's been bringing Medrash. We don't have to tell us now that the Medrash is a valid way of understanding Torah. What Rashi's saying is that in the pshat, in the literal translation of the Torah, because there are such structural problems, there are fundamental issues with, even in the pshat, again, we said like the whole pasuk, this whole discussion is strange because Hashem speaks half a sentence referring back to what was, and then he starts the new sentence, a new topic. It's the pshat is difficult. The drasha is needed, but the problem is the drasha doesn't fit the words. But it's not like they're two opposing things. What Rashi is telling us is that we have a serious problem in understanding the verses according to pshat. And therefore, we need the drasha to be standing alongside the literal. In other words, usually what we say is, look, we have the literal interpretation. We have a question about it. I'll bring a medrash which answers that question. Here we're saying something even more fundamental. We're saying that even though we could understand the pasuk in pshat, in literal interpretation, and it's the main way we should understand it, because it fits the words, it fits the sentence, it fits better. Nonetheless, the pshat itself, the literal reading of the verse itself, tells us there's something missing here. It's kind of hinting at something that needs to be alongside it, some deeper interpretation, the medrash. We need the medrash here. In other words, the pshat itself is so to speak forcing, is inviting, is begging, is insisting that there's also a drasha, because it's something so irksome about reading the literal that we need the drasha to be there alongside it. Says Rashi, that's why, even though I've told you the medrash doesn't fit the literal reading, I'm going to bring it anyway, because in the maskana, Rashi says in the conclusion, I need it. I need the medrash because there's a fundamental issue with reading the pasuk without the medrash. What do we say? Let's get a little deeper into this. Paragraph 10. Explanation about this a little deeper. In the words that, in those other places, this is not the first place where Rashi brings literal, and then Rashi brings a way to explain it in Medrash. In places where Rashi says there are many ways of understanding this in Medrash, where Rashi means to say that, look, I explained it to you in Pshat, in literal translation, but there are some issues that are not fully explained by the Pshat, so I want to let you know there is Medrash, which will take away those issues, right? That's usually what Rashi brings, Pshat and then Medrash. But since but besides for that problem that is still unanswered, usually there's no problem with learning the pasuk literally. In other words, there's one issue in other places where it brings a medrash. The pasuk fits. I can read the pasuk without the medrash, but there's an issue that's still unanswered. I want you to know there's a medrash that deals with that. So you should know about the medrash also. Here it's different. Here what Rashi is saying that even though the medrash doesn't fit the words, but there's issues in this discussion that the pshat just cannot address, cannot lay the matter to rest. We need the medrash here. Yes, medrash like the Gemara's. Many certain medrashim have certain authors, but the Medrash Rabbi is a compilation. You'll find many, like the Gemara, like the Mishnah. You'll find many. Medrash Rabbah. No, this is, I don't know who authored this, but Medrash Rabbah brings many opinions. Medrash Rabbah is Tanaik. It's Mishnah, way before Rashi, of course. So here Rashi's saying, when the 5-year-old reads the pasuk and he hears Moshe Rabbeinu saying, Hashem, why did you do bad? In last week's parsha, and Hashem speaks harshly to him, and he remembers, one second, I learned about Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov in the book of Bereshis. They also had plenty of things they could have complained to about Hashem, just like Moshe, but they didn't. So he understands simply that certainly when Hashem brings up the forefathers, he's definitely telling Moshe, look, I missed this kind of behavior. You're challenging me. They didn't. On the contrary, if Hashem wouldn't have answered that way to Moshe, the 5-year-old would say, why didn't Hashem take him to task? Here comes the Moshe Rabbeinu and starts complaining. Why doesn't he tell him, look, you're not the first guy on the block. You come from good stock. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were big saints. They never asked me questions. So therefore, after Rashi explains that that's the Medrash says that after Moshe complained, Hashem says, hello, I'm going to speak harshly to you. And I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They didn't speak to me like that, but that's Medrash. So it's almost like the Medrash in concept is pshat, but the problem is it doesn't fit into the psukim. In other words, if I want to get into the mind of a 5-year-old, it makes perfect sense that Moshe Rabbeinu starts complaining and Hashem says, hello. I mean, I don't want to put something in the sikha that's not there. But imagine a kid comes and complains, and this is the youngest kid in the family, and he has a bunch of kids on top of him. And the father would say, hello, you have older brothers. I told them the same thing. They never said a word about it. Like, what, I told you to clean up your toys. I've been telling 10 kids that were born, that came before you. They all did it. You're now saying it's not fair. Why do I have to clean my toys? In the 5-year-old, the discussion makes perfect sense. But the problem is, says Rashi, that's not the pshat in the words. It's a medrash. So that's why Rashi says, first I'll explain what the rabbis say, but I also want to tell you, it's not in the words. So first Rashi says, I'm going to tell you the pshat of Rabbi Seinu. He doesn't yet say what it is. He says, but it's not in the words. But why isn't it pshat taka? So first of all, we don't know everything that Hashem always said. Sometimes it's enough. Hashem says, the fact that it says that Hashem spoke to Moshe and the word used is Elokim, which is judgmental. It could be that there's other things Hashem said which just the Torah didn't record. That's not unusual, right? Also, Hashem has already told him at the end of last week's parsha, you're going to see Exodus, you're not going to see entry into Israel. And that's already very harsh. So, if Hashem's speaking harshly, why wouldn't he also continue to speak and compare him to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov? So it's not the pshat, because it doesn't fit the literal translation of the words. The literal translation of the words, Hashem opened up a new topic. He spoke harshly, and then he opened a new topic. He says, look, I promised Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, I'm going to fulfill my promise. In the Medrash way of understanding, Hashem speaks harshly, and he says, and hey, I must say, I'm comparing you to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they didn't ask questions, you do. That's not good. That's Medrash. Again, as I say, it makes sense to the 5-year-old as pshat, but it doesn't fit the words. So the correlation here between the Medrash and the pshat is much more tight. The Medrash is really so close to fitting into pshat that Rashi says Therefore, I say, let's read the pasuk literally, the simple meaning, but let the drasha not go away. Let the drasha also stand alongside of it, because since we need the drasha in the content of the understanding, the psukim, it means that we should leave this drasha because it makes so much sense in the actual narrative. The drasha will stand by the pshat, even though it's not literal, even though it doesn't fit the words literally. In other words, really, in a way, we're saying that the simple reading of the pasuk here is telling us two things: the things that it says literally, and the things that allegorically it hints at. So literally, I appear to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov is saying, I promised, I'm going to do my promise. But the Medrash tells us there's also allegory in those words. Those words are also hinting at something else. Why aren't you like Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, who I spoke to them and they didn't question me? So now, really, paragraph 11, since Rashi is saying this is really a new track for Rashi. This is kind of a new twist. Rashi is giving us a new twist here. Because usually Rashi makes a very clear distinction. Am I speaking pshat now? Medrash that fits into pshat, or am I giving you a medrash? Here Rashi is saying, Rashi's really riding on two, Rashi, I'm not sure what it means. Rashi's really riding on both horses, like riding on both, I don't know what the word Rashi is. Rashi's riding on two things. He's saying there's the pshat, there's the medrash, and they need each other. So where do we find such a concept? Yeah, but that's unusual for Rashi to bring that close relationship without. It's a blurry distinction here. The pshat and the medrash are kind of being intertwined. But where do we see such a concept? Because Rashi brings that, what does it mean? My words are like fire, says Hashem. Just like a hammer can splinter a stone, the fire gets broken down into many sparks, which means, what's the difference between a stone splintering and a fire sparking? If I want to look at the difference between sparks, if I divide the fire into sparks, or I divide the stone into splinters, there's a big difference. A stone is hard. A stone is substance, is mass. When I divide a stone into splinters, each part is different. I get different sizes. I get different. I'll get different forms of splintered stone. When I look at the sparks of a fire, they're all the same. The quantity, the quality, you can't really distinguish between one spark and another spark. The only thing is, they're not the same spark. If I have two sparks coming out of the fire, one went there, one went there. They both look exactly the same. They are exactly the same, but they're not in the same place. So this is what Rashi is telling us. I want you to know that these two, in the Torah, you can also have sometimes that the Torah gets divided and they're identically Torah. When Rashi said it in Parshas Vayishlach, he says like a stone crumbling. There can be a way of understanding different interpretations of the Torah, like a stone splintering. But then there's different reasons. There's different parameters to it, because it's like a stone. Each piece of stone is different. Like also in that pshat, what Rashi was commenting on here the Rabbi brings Rashi. We can correct what I didn't know before. He said he called the Mizbeach, Vayikra lo, Kei Elokei Yisrael. In the pshat, it means that he called the Mizbeach lo. He called the Mizbeach a name that reminded him of the miracle that Hashem, the God of Yisrael, did to Yaakov. In the Medrash, Vayikra lo means Hashem called Yaakov. Hashem called Vayikra lo, Kel Elokei Yisrael. Elokei Yisrael, the God of Jacob, Kara lo, called Yaakov Kel. He gave him an elevation. He called him, in a sense, God. The word lo is you can't compare what it means in the pshat, what it means in the drasha. In the pshat, it means he called the mizbeach. The law goes on the mizbeach. In the drasha, the law goes on Yaakov. Here in our parsha, we have a new. This is not a splintering of stones, the different interpretations. This is like the splitting of fire, where both interpretations are the same. They're both requisite to understanding the pshat, understanding the simple understanding, just like sparks are exact same composite. This spark, that spark. It's just that they're different. This spark is pshat, and this spark is medrash, but they're both equal, and they're both equally required and equally relevant to the pasuk. Just one fits in the words, one fits in the context, in the concept. Okay, so this is we've tried to be speak about subtle things here, and we've come out with the fact that this first Rashi, this beginning of the pasuk Parsha Vaerah, there's a way we read it more literally, but then there's a way we have to understand it more in terms of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Hashem in a very challenging way, and Hashem is responding to that challenge. What have we come out with, which will give us a rule about the Torah in totality, paragraph 12. So we see from this in a very powerful way how the entire Torah is one. In other words, what does it mean when we say that the Torah is one Torah? Even with all the different interpretations and levels and facets, it's one Torah. It doesn't just mean that everything emanates from one place. And because they're all intertwined, they all have to fit into each other. And even it doesn't just mean that it's like one body where everything fits into, just like the different limbs of the body fit, and they're different, but they all fulfill the complete state of a body with different functions. So it is with Torah. More than that, in every place, in every part of Torah, has its own ways of being studied. Pshat is pshat, medrash is medrash. But because it's all part of Hashem's Torah, it's all part of the fire of Hashem, in a way, it retains its simplistic aspect of being the word of Hashem, and therefore it's equal with all other parts of Torah. There's something about the Torah which maintains its godliness, and in that sense, it's equal to every other part of Torah. They're all sparks of fire which cannot really be. They're different, but you can't see any difference between them. They're all the words of Hashem. And here we have, therefore, a teaching, paragraph 13, when it comes to the inner teaching of Torah, the neshama of Torah, which there is resistance. There's resistance. Some say, look, I'm not a Kabbalistic kind of person. I'm not somebody who understands deeper things. So I'll stick to what was always studied in traditional Judaism, the Talmud, the Halacha, the Chumash. I'm not going to open myself up to also studying the deeper aspects of Kabbalah, Hasidism, what we call the neshama of the Torah, the soul of the Torah. But from this we understand that you cannot, that would be, since the Torah is one, so sometimes even when we want to understand something in the nigla, in the revealed aspect of Torah, the only way we can understand it is by going one step higher and looking at it from the perspective of Penimiyut Torah, of the inner teaching of the Torah. And really, it's all part of one big Torah. So therefore, you find, for example, that the Torah speaks about the feet of Hashem. This week's parsha speaks about the finger of Hashem. Similarly, we need to understand those concepts. You need to get into deeper understanding of inner teachings of Torah, because it doesn't mean Hashem is a finger, obviously. So we're going to have to go and understand it in an allegoric way. We have to understand it in a Sephirot way, in a Kabbalistic way. On the other hand, some things in the books of the Arizal, who's the foremost Kabbalist, he has some very profound things that he teaches about Pshat, about literal interpretation. So really, they're all parts of one Torah. By learning all parts of Torah in a way that we feel and show that it's like one Torah Achat, one Torah, so we'll be able to merit to have the new level of Torah that's going to come with Mashiach. It says when Mashiach comes, he's going to teach the entire people Torah, and he's going to teach them the inner teachings of Torah, which today are too deep for us to even be able to comprehend. At any rate, this is the sikha. The bottom line is that the medrash in this particular verse, the medrash and the pshat are required side by side.